you. Thank you very much for having me today. And on your comment about the pets, my dog always tries to be a part of this session. So if that's the case, I apologize in advance. But a quick intro on Brex first. So if you're not familiar, Brex is a credit card and a bank account product alternative for startups. We started back in 2017, have been growing a lot since, and have been working with Alliance of Angels for quite some time. We're very excited about our partnership. And a little bit of background on me and what we'll be talking about this session. I was actually the first hire at Brex back in 2017. Since then, I had many different functions, from financial modeling to recruiting to customer support to marketing, PR, business development, and more recently, I'm the general manager of our tech business, which is very exciting because it means that I get to work very directly with startup founders, with accelerators, funds, angel investors, and so on. And I thought that to organize the session in a couple of ways. So I wanted to be very interactive, and I'm planning to leave at the very least 30 minutes of Q&A at the end. For the first part, I will kind of, tell a little bit about our story, focusing on three main lessons. One is the idea of like pushing beyond measure, and this idea of like being a fixer, of running through walls and really thinking creatively to overcome obstacles of the early days and get things done. The second one is around how we thought about our founding team and our initial team of executives, and how we continue to scale our team and the lessons learned there. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about Brex in the remote world and some of important lessons that we learned about building a company that is growing so quickly in a world where nobody's in the same room anymore. So that's kind of what I wanted to touch on today. We'll have the 30 minutes at the end, but I want this to be as interactive and helpful as possible. So feel free to jump in if you have any questions. Sounds good. So a little bit on the, our story. So Brex was founded by Enrique and Pedro. Enrique Dubograz and Pedro Franceschi, they had started a fintech in Brazil that was very similar to Stripe. So online payments infrastructure, but in Brazil, when they were 16 years old, around 16 years old. How they got into that, like they were both self-taught engineers from a very young age. Pedro was always like an Apple aficionado, was always understanding how they work, taught himself to program, and did the first jailbreak of the iPhone 3G in the world when he was only 12 years old. Got some angry papers from Apple, but made a name for himself, and eventually went to work at a very early age as an engineer in a payments company. Enrique also taught him to program, but that was because he wanted to play this online game for free because his parents wouldn't pay that subscription for him, and so he learned to program, which eventually kind of led him to know the world of startups and gave him this desire to dive into the world of growing companies, high tech, and eventually he learned about Stanford and so on. And what is really cool, and the reason why I went all the way back, is that there's an interesting lesson that repeats itself in this idea and in Brex as well later. So Enrique actually won a hackathon, when he was pretty young, with an idea that was sort of like Tinder, so a dating app, but instead of geolocation, it used Facebook friends. And when it was time to monetize it, he realized that online payments in Brazil were far from ideal, and that was a much better market to be in. So that's when he connected with Pedro, and they started the first fintech in Brazil. As things were advancing, they were growing the team pretty quickly. They applied to Stanford. It was like around time to apply for college, and ended up getting in. And they saw that as an opportunity to, close that cycle of the company in Brazil they had started so early, and actually explore what was out there in Silicon Valley, like such a exciting market and flow of ideas that we weren't yet like necessarily finding in Brazil. So they sold the company in the fall of 2016. They went to Stanford, and their plan was never really to finish school, was more to spend a year there, learning about trends, learning about what was out there, and then thinking about the next big idea and what was next for them to build. Only 3 months in, they dropped out because they already were, pretty kind of interested in an idea of virtual reality. And they thought that, fintech's too complicated, need to deal with all of these banks and so on. And sometimes some slow financial institutions. Let's do something on the bleeding edge of technology. And they thought that VR was what was going to be next for them. So in the winter of 2017, they got into Y Combinator with this VR idea. The company at the time was called Beyond, and Y Combinator's an accelerator located in Silicon Valley. And once they were there, they started working on the actual idea of the Beyond, of the VR company, and they realized a few things, which I think were some of the earliest important lessons of Brex. One was that there is a question that obviously everyone is very focused on, which is product market fit, right? We're all seeking product market fit. But there is an important question, even more important question, that comes even before that, which is founder market fit. You need to be able to answer for yourself and for your investors and for your team, why are you, out of billions of people in the world, the right people to tackle that specific problem? And they didn't really have a good answer for VR. The competitors were Google, Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, companies that had a lot of resources to put in this specific problem. They didn't feel like anything about really their background or expertise put them in a unique position to solve this problem better than these other players that were already working on that. In addition to that, they were also trying to get a credit card. They had gotten at the time a little bit of a seed investment as part of the Y Combinator program, was around like $120,000 in the bank. And they wanted a credit card, not so much because they wanted a line of credit, but because like most startups, around 50% of your expenses require a credit card. It's subscriptions, Uber, plane tickets, and they needed a credit card to kind of start out under some subscriptions or to get and pay for an Uber to go meet with a potential investor. And every single bank turned them down. They said, your company doesn't have a credit history. They said, yes, of course, because we just incorporated. We don't even have a history, let alone a financial history. And they started to be like, wow, like, so for all of these startups that have raised solid money, nobody will give them a credit card. They're looking at a completely, irrelevant indicator, which is credit history of a company that just incorporated, when they could be looking at how much money they have in the bank, right? Like this company is going to raise. And that would be a much better way to look at it, and a much better way for these financial institutions to set a limit. And as they started looking at that, they saw that there was a lot more opportunity beyond access. So founders could get a card, but the banks would require them to put a personal guarantee, which is even more risk in the shoulder of founders that are already taking so much, right? To kind of take this leap of faith and start a company. They're required to put their kind of personal credit score, right, in the line. And getting that personal guarantee is lowering their personal credit scores month after month. And if the company goes under and is unable to kind of honor its credit card debt, which we always hope it's not the case when we are building a company, right? But it is the reality for around 65% of companies in the United States that start, then that's their assets, their personal assets on the line. And so there is the option of personal guarantee, but it was a very bad option. So, and when they were looking at this idea of access, they saw that the opportunity was way beyond just access to a credit card. You know, receipt collection and matching for audit purposes were very messy. Expense management was very messy. It was really time consuming. It was a lot of hours being put into something that should have been automated in the first place. And then they said, you know what? We thought that fintech was very complicated, but at least it's a complicated that we understand. And that realization made them pivot back from VR to fintech and deep dive into solving the problem of payments for startups. And so that was early 2017. Around that time, I was finishing college. I went to Harvard in Boston, and they spoke with me and said, hey, like, what are you doing after college? I was already signed up with a different company, which was a large consumer goods company. I wasn't really involved in the world of tech. And they said, well, like, you know what, like we've known each other for a little bit. We met when I was applying to Harvard. They were applying to Stanford. We did so through the same program in Brazil, this free program that helped Brazilian kids apply to colleges in the United States. And also, you know, they're from Rio and Sao Paulo. I'm from a little bit of like a more rural area, like in the northeast of Brazil. Nobody from my state had ever gotten to Harvard, and I was the first one to do so. They said, you know what, like, you seem like you're a hustler. Join our team as our first hire and just learn fast and go with whatever we need at the moment. And that's exactly what I did, right? Like I said in the beginning, it's been from finance to recruiting to customer support, right? Building the customer support team, hiring engineers in the Bay Area as a company on stealth. And it's been almost 4 years of an incredible journey. And I want to share a few of these, which is the three I kind of said in the beginning. But before I move on to that, I want to see if there are any questions. It's hard for me to monitor the chat as I speak, so I'll just let you unmute and ask questions if you have them along the way.
Hi, Larissa. This is Krishnan. So what gave you the courage or maybe motivation to join as employee number one, given that you're probably going to be set up with a job in a stable company? So what was the motivation for you?
That's a great question, and definitely one that I get a lot. I knew Enrique and Pedro's story, and I knew that they had created and scaled a payments company in Brazil, where in an environment where, as we say in Brazil is not for beginners, and they were able to scale a very successful fintech to over 100 employees when they were only 16 to 18 years old. I had spoken with them in many occasions, and to me, I had the conviction that Enrique and Pedro were truly special, and they were going to do something that would change the game in payments. I'm interested in finance and payments. I studied economics in school. I wasn't really, didn't really have much exposure to tech, but seeing what tech companies unlock in terms of potential and benefits to society every single day, I thought that starting something like that with them would be a once in a lifetime opportunity. And just the learnings that I would have in a couple of years couldn't match those of any established company that I could join, in my opinion. But great question. I'll
Hi,
wait us.
Larissa.
Mhm.
Okay. Hi, Larissa.
Hey,
Yeah,
man.
I had a question about founder market fit.
Got it.
Yeah, I was just asking like if I found a problem and maybe I'm not experienced in it. So what do you think? I should go for it or not?
Can you say that again? I'm not sure I got it.
Yeah, if I have found any a problem and I know the solution and I'm gaining some traction, should I go for it or not? Even if I think I'm not the perfect person for, I don't have the founder market fit, but maybe I have done this customer discovery and people are liking my solution and I'm getting traction.
Yeah, of course. Like it's not a very radical definition, right, of founder market fit. What it means is like, what is this problem, right? Have others tried to do it before and failed? If so, what am I doing differently? Or even what am I doing differently from my competitors that are trying to tackle the same problem that I think will make the difference and will make this be the best solution? That's more the question that you should ask. And it seems in your case that you have done that research.
Hi, Larissa. I'm Joseph
Hey,
Brigante,
Joseph.
CEO of Alio FinTech. We raised, or I should say, I raised our first round last week, and you mentioned you were the first to join that company because you were passionate about, about the opportunity and solving the problem. Um, the two guys that came on, I feel like if I had five me's, we'd be okay with the same
Right.
devotion. Do you have any advice on how to scout and really make that determination about their passion in terms of making those first few choices, in terms of actual hires?
Definitely. And actually, one of my points was on team and how to think about your early team. And I'll just jump into that. And if that doesn't answer your question, we can go back to it. Sounds good?
Yep.
So, to us, in the beginning, like the people you bring on board, they not only teammates, right? Like not only like your team, also your investors and etc. There is a super important thing you need to keep in mind, right? Like investors in the very first investors, like more than just about the capital, they also need to bring something that is very important for you early on, especially if you're a company on stealth, which is access. So, you could get the same capital from different sources. Maybe someone who used to invest in health tech could invest in Brex and we have the capital. But we would be ignoring a very important component, which is we want to bring on board people who have the know-how, people who've navigated the industry before and will be able to help us with insights, will be able to help us with access, right? To maybe licenses that we need. What is the best way to like have a good shot at getting them? How even like other people who are very successful at other startups that we can recruit to our team. How do we get to these people? Who are they? What are they going to care about? So from the beginning, when we thought about our investors, it was beyond just who would kind of give us the capital we needed, was also who would have the know-how to help us navigate payments. We brought a few people early on, for example, the Cal Pasquarella, who was the CEO of Visa for 12 years, came in and had, super helpful. We had Max Levchin, who was one of the co-founders of PayPal, and I have a specific story that kind of adds to the second point that I'll be sharing after I talk about teams. And when it came to the team, that idea of access and know-how is also very important. So the profile that we looked for was executives who had already scaled a key area of a successful similar company from the point of startup to the point of scale. So I'll give a few specific examples. The two hires immediately after me were Michael Tannenbaum, who is our CFO, and Vince Kogan, who is our general counsel, right? So tech, finance, and compliance, these three pillars of fintech, of what we were trying to do. That's what we had to cover early on. And Michael, he was at the time the chief revenue officer at SoFi, which is a huge fintech, very successful fintech that who's kind of like finance and revenue org. He scaled from the point of startup to the point of scale. So likewise, Vince Kogan, he was the second lawyer at Stripe, and he, what he built and scaled the compliance org from also a much smaller Stripe to the giant that we see today, or like at least like a few
Hola,
years ago.
buenas.
And so
Muy bien, Esther.
that profile repeats itself, right? We want people who aren't just on a huge company overseeing a huge org, or aren't just, only have experience at a company that went up to 10 people. You want people who got in a company from the beginning and took it to the stage of scale, right? In this specific area, in our case, was compliance, finance, and later on sales, risk, and etc. And what that does is that gives you a better sense of what mistakes not to make, what are the fastest ways to do things that they already did before and that you need to do in your company, and even things like what profiles of people to hire next, and sometimes even where to find them, right? So that saves you a lot of time and makes a huge difference in terms of structuring that initial year, and setting yourself up for success. Now, it's very important that, yes, you want these people, right, who are big executives, eventually became huge, big executives at these other fast growing companies, but they're coming in as an individual contributor at first, right, in these very early days. And so just like they should be able to build and run a 20, 30 people org down the line, or maybe a little less, 10, 20 people org down the line, they also need in the beginning, especially, to do the work, to draft contracts, to build the models, and to kind of do this like icy work that needs to be done until new people come on board. But this is a profile that we continue to replicate. To your point of like, how do you know if they're committed and aligned to the mission? I think that one of the things, and this community is great for that, some people forget to, ask their investors for help, or they don't want to bother, and your success is their success. So try to get as much help as you can. In our case, we were a company on stealth. The founders were two, 20-year-olds, right? We 22, 20, 21-year-olds. We really used our investors to help convince these people to join early on, and try to also help explain what they were seeing in terms of potential, in terms of all of these things they took into consideration to make the investment. And yeah, like someone who comes in that early and leaves such a big job to do that, they have to believe and to be aligned to the mission and think that it is going to work, because it is a huge risk on their end that they're taking, and that speaks a lot about them believing in the company and wanting to kind of invest their dream in this as well. Does that answer your question, Joseph?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect.
Can I add to that? Sure.
So you're bringing on pretty high-powered executives from other organizations to a company that's pretty much a startup. How do you convince them to come? Or do you make them partners in the company? Do you provide them with stock? What's the sales pitch?
Sure, yeah. So I touched a little bit on that with asking our investors for help, because we already had to convince them, and if they share what convinced them with these candidates, that's already kind of you know, a pretty good progress. But just know as well, one thing that is really important is we have always been pretty generous on with, you know, especially with cash, because we believe that if we can get someone who is A plus and who will do the work of 4 or 5 kind of more average, less experienced people, we will go out of our way to get those people. So we're also very generous with comp, especially early on. Obviously, nothing that is too different from the market, right? But kind of placing a premium on people we think will really make the difference. And in order to do that, like as part of our very first fundraise, which was our Series A, was 7.5 million. That's a little bit of like on the higher end than a typical Series A. But we were a financial institution, so we actually needed the capital to kind of, you know, land on the lines of credit for the different cards. But also we made it very clear for our investors that we would need enough capital to make these hires, because that would make a difference between us getting there or not. So that's another way that we convince this team.
And just one more thing. How do you
Sure.
how do you align culture with those hires? Is culture a big part of it?
Like culture has always been a big part of it. Honestly, I don't know for other companies, we didn't have our culture defined from day one. We had things that were important for us. For example, you know, being aligned with the values, you know, this idea of pushing beyond measure and not stopping at just some excuse. So we had ideas of what we wanted, and we tried the best that we could to translate these into filters on our interview process. And I'll give you a specific example because I like specific examples. So one thing that at least I used to ask, and I continue to do so when I was interviewing, was I want to measure whether the person is aligned, right, with this idea of not stopping at the first obstacle, right? Not you know, stopping at the first no, really pushing beyond measure to accomplish whatever it was that we were trying to accomplish, which in the early days, it's even harder than after you've fundraised a couple of times and you've been in the media a couple of times. And I wanted to see if they had this like be a fixer attitude on their work. And what I would ask is, hey, can you please tell me about a time when the actions that you took to get something you're trying to do done, when the actions that you took got significantly blocked for some reason, and you kept pushing beyond reason until achieve that result, right? Despite all odds. And then they'll tell me the story. Sometimes it's something, you know, just from that answer, you already see, wow, like, yeah, that seems like a pretty cool challenge that you had to overcome. Or like, well, like, is that really the best thing you've ever had to overcome? And then you can ask, you know, what was your thought process? Why was it important to you to get that done? What did you learn along the way? And how can you apply that learning in the next endeavor, right? Or in the next project that you would take. So that's one way. In the beginning, there were things that were important to us. And another one that was super important for us was that we were only able to offer a credit card that went completely against you know, the standard, and actually was truly serving startups well. And like you could sign up for in 5 minutes instead of sometimes a month, which is what it can take with some other financial institutions. We were only able to do that because all of us had in ourselves this idea, which we now call growth mindset, which is don't accept answers as they are. Really go and study the root cause of why things are done in a certain way, and go and figure out a outside of the box interpretation to how we can make that happen, even though the world tells you that you can't, right? So we were able to, for example, find a way to rebuild, right, the entire financial infrastructure from scratch versus using the legacy technologies that banks use. And that gave us the autonomy to build Brex like we wanted, and like we thought that a product like this should have been built, even though so many people said it would be impossible. So we didn't have our culture written down yet. That was much later. That was, more towards 1 year of Brex. But we had things that to us were non-negotiable that we thought were really important to have. And we tried to put them in the best words that we could find, and create questions in our interview process to measure for those. In this case of seek truth, right, or growth mindset, we would often ask, like, what is the thing or subject that you know in most depth? Can you tell me about it? And so on. So this is how the answer for the culture point. Then later on, we were, okay, now we understand what these are. There's these 5 things that we're always coming back to, and that we are always attributing our success in different instances to. Then we put them into actual words and we made them our culture. And in every all hands meeting, which happens weekly, the very first slide of our all hands meeting, the whole company, is our values. And the very last slide recognizes someone who spiked at one of these values. This way, it's not something that is forgotten, just written in a wall. It's something that every single week, existing hires and new hires can be reminded of and see them working in practice. And that has worked very well for us. Any other questions on this topic?
Kind of related to this topic, because you mentioned operating in stealth. So it's correlated. My plan has always been to operating stealth. We raised our first round, off letters of engagement. The idea, we're building out the MVP, but an incubator invited me to join. And, they said, well, how are you going to get more investors if you don't put the website up and get the letters of engagement? Because as a fintech company, we can't get revenue until we meet the compliance needs and become a broker dealer. I have never thought that was wise. I've always wanted to attack the beachhead market with surprise. But under this pressure, I've said, well, okay, maybe we'll consider putting out the website soon. Counterintuitively, it does not seem right to me. How did you raise money operating in stealth? Because without compliance standards in place, you can't get any revenue in the door. There's a lot of advice around tech, but fintech, you seem to have a lot of domain expertise.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've learned that early stage investing, way more so than the later stage investing, is a lot less about revenue and a lot more about, do you have a plan, an idea, in a market that is big enough and coherent enough that investors who've seen probably 100 other attempts to tackle that problem, right? Because they see like thousands of companies every year, will look at your plan and say, okay, this is different. I think this can work. And you have a very clear thought process on what is the opportunity that you're seeing, what is the size of the opportunity that you're seeing, and the next steps, like how you're going to build what you need to build and validate what you need to validate to get there. From a lot of, I wouldn't say vast experience, but with all of the opportunities that I've had to be in conversations like that, or to speak with founders who are going through fundraisers, that makes a much bigger difference in a yes or no from an investor than just some early traction or website that you have up. But I might be wrong depending on other industries. That's what I typically see in the world of, software and so on. And since we talked about one of the values, which is the being a fixer and pushing beyond reason, right? That's like the idea of thinking very creatively to achieve your goals despite the obstacles. I wanted to give a couple of really cool examples from the early days of how we did that and why we continue to bring that mindset even now as a company of more than 500 employees, and how we encourage that with every single one and every single initiative that we have in the company. So a couple of them, right? As I said in the beginning, investment in the early days was a lot more about definitely about capital, but beyond capital was very much so about access as well and know-how. We wanted people who could help us navigate the payment system. Enrique and Pedro had a ton of experience in fintech, but that was in the Brazilian ecosystem. The United States was a completely different animal, and we needed to bring people early on to help navigate that. And one person that they really wanted to bring as one of the very early investors was Max Levchin, who was, did many things, but one of the things that he did was being one of the co-founders of PayPal, like fintech giant PayPal. And they really tried everything that they could. They tried cold emailing, they tried introductions through Stanford professors, they tried introductions to through the investors they had in Brazil from the first company, and they were not successful at getting his attention. And someone less persistency would probably look at the situation and say, what, like maybe we're aiming too high here. Let's get somebody else for now. Let's try to generate some traction or some more develop the product further, then we can kind of get back. But they're like, no, like I think we'll make a huge difference. Really need to get him. He's very smart and would love to kind of have him join our early group of investors. What they did was they found out through the Stanford Career Center that Max's company at the time was hiring college students for the summer internships. And the last interview stage included an interview with Max himself. So Enrique and Pedro, who probably never had to put together a CV before, put together a CV, put together a full application, went through the process. And through the process, they were, their goal was to get to the final stage and then face to face with Max say, hey, like, we have a confession to make. We're not really looking for a job, but we have an idea that I think you really like. And halfway through, further down this process, they were able to meet the people who eventually helped get to his investments team. And we were able to bring Max early on as one of our earliest investors. That's a pretty cool story to tell of like really thinking very creatively and going beyond kind of, the normal way you would expect things to get done. Another very cool one as well. And Joseph, to your point of, company on stealth, there are challenges beyond just investment or even traction, right? As a company on stealth, it's extremely difficult for you to hire engineers, especially if they're not a referral. If you're trying to, we had a big network in Brazil, engineers and, people we could hire early on that were very excited because they knew the story of the first company, but that was not the case in the Bay Area. And there was a point when, you can ask, oh, but Enrique and Pedro, like they were studying computer science at Stanford. Why couldn't they just recruit their friends? Their friends were freshmen, right? Needed people with a lot more experience than that. And I was doing recruiting at the time, kind of at the same time that I was also doing sales. And it was extremely difficult to get the attention of engineers in the Bay Area. I was sending thousands of LinkedIn messages. I was sending thousands of emails, maybe not thousands, but hundreds of emails or sequences. And we weren't getting pretty much any responses. The ones we did get said, hey, no, thank you, or hey, please unsubscribe. And that's when we reached out to our investors because we love counting on them. And we said, hey, like, we really need advice on talent recruitment and retention. And they said, okay, we have the right guy for you. Introduced us to senior talent at one of their portfolio companies. So it was like much larger company than us, much larger org, but there was this guy who had done a lot for them in talent. And he started kind of advising us. Later on, he, loved Brex so much that eventually came in-house. But a very important lesson as well from him was he said, hey, you can't do the same thing that everybody else is doing and expect exceptional results, right? The amount of emails and LinkedIn messages that these founders get, not these founders, sorry, that these engineers get, San Francisco engineers get, or Google engineers get, is overwhelming. They will never pay attention to your message in particular, especially because they Google beyond, we were called beyond at the time. They Google beyond it and don't find anything, right? So back to the Joseph's like question concern on navigating being a company that is not out there, right? That is not public. And he said, here's what we're going to do. Instead of sending thousands of emails and LinkedIn messages that will be completely ignored, let's focus on selecting 500 very, very good profiles that you would be equally happy having at Brex. Now let's do, truly study their background, what makes them unique, and let's write them handwritten letters. What was the last time that you got a handwritten letter, right? This will definitely catch their attention more so than a LinkedIn message or an email. And we can be a little mysterious, right? You can make the stealth mode work on your side. Mention some of the investors that you already have, mention this really cool project, and mention how that their specific background you think will make a huge difference as one of the earliest employees of this company that we're just starting to build and that we think will be enormous. And we wrote these letters instead of we obviously take us a lot more work because they're handwritten, so let's just do like 100 a week, and we'll ship to their office, right? Well, obviously we didn't have house address, but we shipped to their office named to them. And the response rate on that was very surprising. It was like 30% actually emailed back to the email that we put on the letter saying, hey, like, I don't know what this is about, but you definitely caught my attention. Let's get coffee. And that helped us a lot, that not only with that specific need at the time, but also realizing that we'll never achieve exceptional results by just doing what everybody else is doing, or just trying things that we've already tried and haven't necessarily seen success on. So that's to the point of pushing beyond measure, or the idea of being a fixer, like truly owning the problem and thinking creatively to get to a solution. We only have 10 more minutes, so I want to make sure I answer questions. So I'll just open to Q&A if that works for everyone.
I put a question into the chat that I will do it right away. How did you define the valuation model of your company when you started it? Can you suggest us some methods or some methodologies about the valuation of your company?
Yeah, like this is something that is done in conjunction, right, with investors. They're a huge part in determining an early valuation, but it really, there's some aspects that are very important. For example, what is the size of the market? Who are other competitors? What is the total addressable market? How fast do we think we can get to a certain market share, right? Market penetration. What is the revenue model, right? That makes a huge difference. How are you monetizing it? In our case, was like, we make money, we don't charge annual fees, but we make money, in the card transactions, just like any other credit card. So to you, the card holder, you don't notice this. It's not on you. Like the store that is processing the card gives us a rebate. That's how it works for every single credit card, right? So it's free for the user, not for the store processing the card. And so, yeah, what is this rate? What is the take? So if this is a percentage of total spend, how many startups do we think will have year 1, year 3, year 5? And how much do they spend, right? And what percentage of those go on to raise the next round? So in our case, that's how it was. You can do something similar to your base. What is the total addressable market? How many of these you think you can take? What is the revenue you are earning from them? That's the calculations that we ran, but obviously there's a lot more complexities, and investors are always a big part of that as well. But great question. Thank you, Lena. Sham?
Hi, how are you? Just had a question to get your perspective on cross-border payments per se, as an individual or as a company. And then the second question is, how do you keep up with the latest technology changes, especially in the fintech space?
Yeah, and I'm not sure I understood your first question. I definitely understood your second question.
Yeah, the first question is on the cross-border payments, because that's the kind of the buzzword these days, right? So as a company, do you have anything on your roadmap, or like personally, are you looking into that, more of a 2-year roadmap or whatnot, right? Just want to hear your perspective on cross-border payments.
And do you mean like in terms of with other payment systems, or with other countries, or what is cross-border in your case?
Correct. It's other countries, and it's not a denominator like US dollar or maybe.
Got it. Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we've been working with from early on, right? Because as international founders ourselves, remember I mentioned in the beginning that the founders that have a personal credit score, they at least had the option of getting a personal guaranteed card for their business. It's not a good option, but at least they had that option. For international founders that don't necessarily have a credit score built yet, because maybe they just came to the United States, like Enrique and Pedro, like myself when I first came, that is not even an option because they don't even have their own personal credit score. So we've always been very appealing to startups as a whole, even more appealing to startups with international founders. And so we've always been looking at this issue of currency and receipt upload in another language. That's definitely one that we work with on a day-to-day. And we build our own infrastructure to read those receipts, to make those conversions. We are expanding our ability to kind of send wires and ACHs offshore as well. We already have that ability today. Our card is MasterCard World Elite. So that's the top rated MasterCard program. It has the highest acceptance rate in many different, most of the countries in the world. So that's also pretty cool program to be a part of. And so has always been a top of mind for us, and we have all of these things, obviously more to come with our roadmap. Your second question, right? How do we keep up? Yes, this world changes very quickly, and although you should always pay attention and be careful with disruption, right? You also need to stay focused and stay true to what you are doing. In our case, we came in to solve, payments and expense management of companies, right? From startups to much larger companies, which we already serve today. And these companies today are using pretty archaic systems. So what we are doing is already light years ahead and helping them in ways that no other tooling they use or financial provider they use were able to help them. And so obviously we are aware and alert to new trends, but we're already like pretty ahead of the game in terms of what this public that we are serving compared to what the alternative is today.
Yeah, I appreciate your answer. Yeah, I'll reach out to you offline. I have a couple of use cases in mind, so I don't want to take much of time here, but I'll reach out to you offline.
Cool. I think we have 4 more minutes if anyone has any other questions. And if you put it on the chat, I will also let you kind of unmute and ask just so you can keep it more interactive. Awesome. So I think we're wrapped up. A couple minutes back.
Well, Larissa,
yeah.
I don't have so much of a question as a comment. I'm very impressed with your thought process. Very impressed with the way you've laid this out. So I really want to thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the kind words, John, and thank you everybody for coming today. I hope this was helpful, and I'm excited to engage in more talks like this with the community.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Larissa, for choosing to spend time with us today. We really appreciate all the insights that you shared. So thanks again to all. I'm also going to add a link to the chat if folks are interested in learning more about our partnership with Brex. Feel free to click through. It details some information about their product, which is specially designed in many ways for young companies. So, and with that, thanks again, Larissa. Thanks to everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Larissa. Nice to meet you.
Great meeting, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ciao.
Ciao.